What is going on, everybody? It is your boy J Ray from Ray Photography coming at you with a podcast. And today we're going to be going over the second cornerstone of the exposure triangle, which is shutter speed. If you haven't watched my first episode, I recommend you go check it out now. It'll help provide some context for what I'm saying here. Okay, shameless plug out of the way. Let's get right into things. So, shutter speed. Before we talk about the speed of the shutter, we should talk about the shutter itself. Here on my second camera, yes, 2-camera setup this time, I have my Rebel T6, which is an old camera. The first camera I actually started doing photography with. Kind of crazy. I would never recommend taking off your cap and exposing the mirror and the sensor like this. But I don't use this camera anymore, and I can break my own rules, so it's fine. So anyway, we're gonna turn it on, and it's gonna be very hard to show you, especially because of how fast these shutters move. But basically, what's happening is, and this is a DSLR. Sorry, there are two types of cameras in this world, in this professional world. There is mirrorless cameras, and there are DSLRs. This one is a DSLR. I'll go more into the differences in a different video. All you need to know right now is that there's a mirror right here. You can possibly see it in the reflection maybe. There's a mirror right here, and what happens is when I press the shutter button, the mirror is going to come up and expose the sensor. But before the sensor is exposed, there's the shutter. The shutter is basically two metal rectangles that travel vertically and a little bit horizontally across the sensor with a little slit in between. So there's two of them, and they have a small slit in between. And in that slit is where the light passes through and hits the sensor and creates your image, right? So we talk about aperture. Light comes through your aperture. At the same time, the shutter is traveling across with a little slit, letting in the light across the entire sensor, creating your image. So, as you saw right there, the mirror comes up, and the shutters travel so fast you can barely even see it when I'm going. I mean, I can keep doing this for days, and you can try to look out for it, and you're not gonna see it. This is 1/50th of a second, which is generally a slow shutter speed. So we're talking about shutter speed now. All right. Basically, the shutter speed is how fast the shutter how long the shutter takes to travel across the sensor completely. Man, I don't know what's going on with my voice right now. I'm tired. It's been a long week. I'm going to be real with you guys. So basically, the shutter speed is how long it takes the shutter to travel across the sensor entirely. So 1/50th means that it takes 1/50th of a second for the shutters to travel across the sensor completely. Just a quick edit here. I didn't really explain as thorough as I would have liked to. Basically, what I'm saying is that however long the sensor is exposed to light for. So not specifically how fast the shutter is moving, but more so how long the shutter is exposed to light for. So 1/4000th of a second it's exposed to light, 1/50th it's exposed to light, and so on and so forth. As a sports photographer, I generally shoot at 1/640th, 1/800th, and even that pales in comparison to how fast they can get. Most cameras these days can go 1/4000th of a second. I think professional lenses, I keep saying lenses, man. I think most professional cameras can go up to 1/8000th of shutter. Man. I'm not gonna cut this because I've been doing this all day. I've been trying to make these podcasts, and I keep messing up things. I'm keeping this in. So anyway, yeah, most professional cameras, I think, can go as fast as 1/8000th of a second, which is just an unfathomable amount of time. It's insane. So why do I shoot at 1/640th, 1/800th, you might ask? Because I want to find a really good balance between the light that I let in and the motion that I capture. And those are two things that the shutter speed affects. The two things that it affects the most when it comes to your pictures. So let's talk about light real fast. I talked about aperture and how wide and how wide and small it can get and how it lets in the amount of light. But also a really important factor is your shutter speed. The faster your shutter speed is, the less light you're going to let in. Just think about it. If you're at 1/4000th of a second, I can't even go how fast. That's incredibly fast. You're only getting 1/4000th of a second of light coming through. And you kind of, it might not exactly process. I didn't understand it for a while, but just think about the opposite ends of the spectrum, right? 30 seconds is how long most cameras can be open for, their maximum shutter speed. minimum, maximum, the longest most cameras can be open, most shutters can be open for. Man, we're cool though. We're fine. This is a podcast. We're just chilling. Ray J and everyone is chilling. Think about 30 seconds of light. If you're looking at the sun for 30 seconds, like that's gonna hurt your eyes. But imagine all of that light that's happening gathering up. Every second, every millisecond, every one fraction of a second that's passing, that's getting into the sensor, is building up each and every time. So if you're open for 30 seconds, that's 30 seconds worth of light hitting the sensor combined. You're pretty much going to get like a white image, no matter what you take a picture of, unless it's basically pitch black and you're very still, whatever. So you think about the two ends of the spectrum, right? 1/4000th of a second, you're getting very little amount of light. 30 seconds, you're getting a ton of light. You want to find a peaceful median. If you're doing portraits, generally, like 1/125th of a second. It all depends on your lighting situation and what kind of lens you have on and the aperture you have. But generally speaking, 1/125th. If you need to get any slower, 1/180th maybe, but then you run into different types of motion blur, and that's the second thing that shutter speed affects when it comes to your images. And as a sports photographer, it's something that we really have to be conscious of, which is why I'll never go any slower than 1/640th of a second. So you think about light and how long the shutter is open for and how much light's being let in. The same thing applies for any motion that happens inside of the frame. So you think about 30 seconds, you can run, I don't know how fast, but you can run 200 meters in 30 seconds. I don't know, I'm just spitting out numbers here, But you can run that distance. So if you have your shutter open for that long, everything that happens in that 30 seconds, you're going to capture all that motion, and it's just going to be a streak. I'll show you an example of a picture right here that I took that's a long exposure. And you can see how the headlights of the cars, they start at one end and they travel all the way through and just create a solid line. And the same thing with the tail lights and the red lights and all that. So that's what a long exposure is basically. And one really good example of the different contrasting shutter speeds in the same thing is like waterfalls. So you can get really nice running and smooth waterfalls with the long exposure with the slow shutter speed, or you can capture each individual droplet with a really fast shutter speed, which is why I shoot action with 1/640th, 1/800th, because it's hard to move faster than 1/800th of a second. That's just how fast humans move, generally speaking. So when I take a picture, 1/800th of a second it takes for the shutter to move across the sensor, and it generally freezes the action entirely right there. Boom. And they say, oh, well, why don't I just shoot at 1/4000th of a second? I'm never going to get any motion blur in 1/4000th. We bring it back to the amount of light that I'm getting. 1/4000th of a second is not enough light for almost any picture. So you have to find a peaceful balance in shutter speed when it comes to lighting and motion blur in your pictures. Generally speaking, you don't want any motion blur unless I'm saying, waterfall, or you're trying to show some sort of really fast motion, like race cars are good to have a little motion blur. But if you're taking portraits, nada, you do not want motion blur. So anyway, that's basically what shutter speed is. I can talk a little bit about video, but I don't know much about it. I'm going to save that for a different video. So that's what shutter speed is, how it affects your motion blur and how it affects the amount of light that comes in through. We also talked about what the shutter actually is. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. I hope I covered everything for you guys. Tune in next time when I talk about the third and final cornerstone of the exposure triangle, which is ISO. Hope you guys enjoyed. Be cool.